Chapter 5. Mrs. Calloway. She knocked the way she always knocked, 3 fast, then 1 slow, like a signature, and Henry was already up from the couch before he'd decided to be. He opened the door and she was there in the hallway with a ceramic dish covered in foil and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular energy she carried that he'd never found a word for exactly. Not loud, just present. The kind of presence that changed the air pressure in a room slightly, made it a little easier to breathe. "I made too much," she said, which was what she always said. "Come in," he said, which was what he always said. Lumpy appeared from nowhere and sat in the middle of the entry hall and regarded Mrs. Calloway with the expression of a cat who had decided to be pleased by something, but didn't want to overcommit. Her name was Patricia, but she'd introduced herself as Mrs. Calloway on the day Henry moved in, and somehow it had stayed that way, which he'd thought about occasionally. Not with any analytical intent. Just as a detail that meant something about the shape of what they were to each other, warm but boundaried, familiar but careful. The particular friendship of 2 people who lived close together, and had decided without discussing it to leave certain doors closed. She was somewhere in her 60s. She wore her hair short and silver and dressed in the way of a woman who had stopped performing youth without having any interest in performing age. She had a laugh that arrived without warning and left the room different. Henry took the dish and brought it to the kitchen and she followed, and Lumpy followed her, which he did every time despite himself. "Chicken and rice," she said, settling onto the stool at the counter the way she always settled, like it was her stool. "The recipe is my mother's. I've been making it for 40 years and it still surprises me." "How does a recipe surprise you after 40 years? "It's better than I expect it to be, every time." She looked at him across the counter. "That's not nothing." Henry found plates. He found the good ones, which he didn't examine too closely as a decision. They ate at the kitchen table because the living room would have required moving things and felt like more of a statement. The chicken was extraordinary. Henry told her so, and she received the compliment with the directness of a person who'd been cooking well for a long time and had made peace with being good at it. "You're not eating enough," she said, not critically, observationally the way she said most things. "I eat. I can tell the difference between eating and eating enough. I've had a husband and 2 sons." She looked at his plate. "Eat more." He ate more. Lumpy positioned himself under Mrs. Calloway's chair and waited with the focused patience of a predator. "He's shameless," Henry said. "He's honest." She tore off a small piece of chicken and lowered it under the table without looking down, which she'd been doing since the 3rd time she visited, and which Lumpy had clearly organized his entire relationship with her around. "There's a difference." Henry looked at his plate and felt something he didn't try to name. The kitchen was warm, the food was good. Outside the window the city went about its business in the dark. It occurred to him not for the first time that this was the part of his life that was actually happening, this small warm kitchen, this woman on the other side of the table, this cat quietly conducting his separate commerce, and that he spent most of his time somewhere else. He didn't know what to do with that. After dinner she stayed, which was new. Usually she collected her dish and left with the efficiency of someone who understood the value of not overstaying. But tonight, she accepted the offer of coffee that Henry made without quite meaning to make, and they ended up on the couch with their cups while Lumpy arranged himself between them with the confidence of a creature who had decided the situation was satisfactory. She told him about her son in Portland, the younger one, who was doing something with sustainable architecture that she didn't fully understand but found moving. She told him about the garden she was planning for the building's courtyard, which the landlord association had technically approved and practically ignored, which she considered sufficient authorization. She had opinions about the courtyard and about the landlord association and about sustainable architecture and about most things, and Henry listened with the specific quality of attention he gave to things he didn't want to end. At some point she turned to look at him directly. She did this, turned the full weight of her attention on you without warning and said, "You're a good listener, Henry." "I don't do much else." "That's not true," she said it simply, not as a correction, as a fact she was reporting. "You pay attention, that's not the same as listening. Most people listen to wait, you listen to keep." Henry looked at his coffee cup. "My ex-wife said something similar," he said, "different conclusion though." Mrs. Calloway was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone who didn't know what to say, the quiet of someone choosing. Her loss, she said. Henry laughed. It came out of him before he'd evaluated it, which was the best kind. Mrs. Calloway looked pleased with herself in a way she didn't bother to conceal. Lumpy, disturbed by the laugh, readjusted his position and settled again with great dignity. She touched his arm when she reached past him for her coffee cup, just her hand on his forearm for a moment, light, incidental, possibly not deliberate at all. Henry felt it the way you feel the specific temperature of something when you've been cold for a while. He didn't move, he didn't make anything of it. He just let it be what it was, whatever it was, and they sat for a while longer in the warm kitchen light with the cat between them and the city outside doing what cities did. The news came on by itself. He'd forgotten he had the television. That was how good the evening had been. He'd forgotten the television existed, which meant he'd forgotten the world outside the apartment existed, which felt briefly like a kind of wealth. The anchor's voice came in mid-sentence, the measured, careful register Henry knew, and he reached for the remote by instinct to turn it off the way he always turned it off and then stopped. Because the footage was already there. They'd done it at night. Henry didn't know why that surprised him. He'd known it was coming, in the way you know weather, but something about the darkness made it different. The footage was from a distance, a long lens shot from what looked like a press pool held well back from a military installation, and the quality was poor enough that you could almost convince yourself you were watching something else. You couldn't, though. They moved in columns. 12 across, the camera couldn't show the depth of it, but the chyron at the bottom of the screen said asterisk 1st Battalion, 200 units, and then the footage cut to a wider shot that showed the columns extending back further than the light reached. The gait was smooth, coordinated. Inhuman in its coordination, the kind of perfect synchrony that no human formation ever achieved because humans were always slightly individual, always slightly off, and these were not. The anchor was saying something about deterrence, about strategic deployment, about a measured response to escalating tensions. The words moved over the footage like they were describing something else entirely. Henry sat very still on the couch. Beside him, Mrs. Calloway had gone quiet. Her coffee cup was on the cushion beside her, forgotten. She was watching the screen with an expression Henry hadn't seen on her before, not fear exactly. Something older than fear, something that knew. On the screen, the columns moved into the dark and the camera tried to follow and couldn't. Henry looked at Mrs. Calloway. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then Lumpy, indifferent to history, stood up, stretched elaborately, and walked off the couch.